Good afternoon. WBRC Television interrupts regularly scheduled programming to continue our live coverage of the funeral services of Coach Paul William Bryant, who died Wednesday of a heart attack. Funeral services, of course, were held this morning at 10 o'clock in Tuscaloosa at the First United Methodist Church, and those services also carried by intercom to the First Baptist Church and the First Presbyterian Church to take care of the huge crowd who turned out for today's funeral services. And Bill, I understand the funeral procession now on its way to Elmwood Cemetery, the final resting place, proceeded down 10th Street in Tuscaloosa by the Coliseum, which of course was Coach Bryant's office, by the Druid City Hospital, where Coach Bryant died on Wednesday, and then down McFarland Boulevard to I-59 to Birmingham, and I think then we'll take I-65 south to Elmwood.
And it's, I suppose, been on the road about an hour now, and that's about driving time to Tuscaloosa, so very soon we should be seeing it, I suppose, arriving at the graveside in Elmwood.
And as we said, some 4,000 people turned out for the funeral services in Tuscaloosa. It's been estimated that some 10 to 30,000 people will be at Elmwood Cemetery for those graveside services, which will take place in just a few moments. Let's go now live to Elmwood. We have Brian Pia standing by live at the chapel at Elmwood. Brian?
Joe, if you can hear me amidst the helicopters that are hovering above here, the Bear Bryant motorcade, about 300 cars, buses and all, is soon to pull into the entrance here at Elmwood. You can see some of the shots here now. It is working its way up the winding roads to the gravesite where thousands are gathered. Of course, it has to pass through the entrance at Elmwood Cemetery, the main entrance where the American flag is flying at half-staff. There are, of course, beautiful flower arrangements here throughout the cemetery, including a houndstooth hat made of flowers, a big, bright, beautiful crimson-colored letter A signifying the University of Alabama, the school where Bear Bryant coached for so many years. It'll take a while for the entire procession to work its way here. The graveside service will take about a half hour to complete, maybe a little bit longer, because there are just so many people here, so many people who want to pay their final respects to the Bear. We will keep you updated on the developments here. Joe?
Okay, thank you, Brian. Bill?
In Tuscaloosa earlier this morning, Paul Bryant's funeral was held at the First United Methodist Church, of course, of Tuscaloosa. Current members of the Crimson Tide team served as pallbearers about 9:20 a.m. They carried the casket into the church. The Reverend Joe Elmore and the Reverend Duncan Hunter led the service. Two other nearby churches were also filled with people who came to pay their last respects, and of course many others simply stood outside, and I'm sure to kind of show their respects to the Bear.
And of course, not only a sad day for Alabama and the nation, but particularly to those who were so close, worked for or played for Coach Paul Bryant, and many of those people attending today's funeral services in Tuscaloosa and the graveside services, which will be held in just a few moments at Elmwood Cemetery here in Birmingham. Some of those attending today, Woody Hayes, a very close friend to Coach Bryant, the man who's taking Coach Bryant's place and following in his coach's footsteps, Coach Ray Perkins, a former coach, now head coach at the University of Auburn, Pat Dye, quarterback Richard Todd, an outstanding quarterback for Coach Bryant and now playing with the New York Jets, and George Allen, also in attendance at today's funeral services, representing President Reagan at the funeral service.
Incidentally, Joe, I understand that Joe Namath, who of course was to have been in Tuscaloosa for the service, apparently they had some weather problems and his plane was late leaving, and so he was not able to make the service in Tuscaloosa, but I understand the weather did lift and he has now arrived in Birmingham, right, and he will be at graveside services this afternoon.
Right. And former sports information director Charlie Thornton, of course, worked for Coach Bryant for some 18 years as public information director and also assistant athletic director at the University of Alabama, now athletic director at Texas A&M, and he was one of the thousands of people at the services in Tuscaloosa this morning, and we have some comments from Charlie Thornton.
When I came here, I was a young, immature person, and I learned how to be a man. I hope I did from him. He taught life, and he taught so many things, and the last day or so, with so many former players and associates back, we've all been telling more stories and really kind of rejoicing in the fact that we were able to be a part of all of it. I think that's the way he would have wanted it, but I don't think there's ever been a man in the field of athletics who has touched as many lives in a positive fashion as Coach Bryant did.
So, such a talented man. What one characteristic stood out above all those? It had to be one characteristic.
Oh, I think just the one characteristic that I personally feel like, and it runs through a thread of talking to people, that you always felt like if you didn't do your very best, that he would know it, and that Tim Davis had a line the other day. Somebody said that when you do something good and somebody tells you Coach Bryant had been proud of you, he said no, Coach Bryant would have expected it, and I think that's the way all of us kind of felt. He motivates you with an intangible thing. I think that was he was the greatest motivator of all time.
The day of the Liberty Bowl up in Memphis, I said something to him about, Coach, asked him, would he have done anything different? And he said he would have won more ball games. Yeah. Do you think that's a fair assessment? Oh,
yeah, I guess so. I really think, that the reason they keep score is to see how many you win. I know that, but in Coach Bryant's case, that's not the important thing, what he did for people. And, of course, he had to win the games in order to get the mystique about him and be the legend and all he was. That's a byproduct of it, but the impact he had on people's lives, I'm talking about children and everybody, and there's millions of people that he has impacted so favorably that he made everybody a better person by being around him and being able to be a part of it.
Charlie Thornton, the athletic director at Texas A&M, former assistant athletic director under Coach Bryant at the University of Alabama. And now we'll go back now live to Elmwood Cemetery. Here again is Brian Pia.
Joe, here at Elmwood, the entire procession, about 300 cars in all, has already arrived. The people are getting off the many cars, getting out of the cars, the many buses that are here, walking up to the tent, the site of the grave. It was a long procession from Tuscaloosa here to Birmingham. So many people here, thousands of them, paying their final respects. Even people who did not know the man, but they knew him only as the Bear. But nevertheless, they feel very close to him. Very shortly, the services will begin, and it will last about a half an hour. Joe?
Okay. Thank you, Brian.
Incidentally, Joe, note just handed me as the procession came north this morning on I-59, lined over overpasses and red and white banners were hanging, reading, "We love you, Bear." At each interchange, hundreds of Bryant fans gathered to catch a glimpse of the record-breaking coach, of course, as we know, who died on Wednesday. In keeping with tradition, cars forming the massive motorcade all have their lights on. The cars traveling south on the highway had their lights on as well. So I've even heard it mentioned, a lot of people said that we ought to burn our lights in recognition of Coach Bryant, and that might be picked up and done throughout the day. I don't know.
One of the gentlemen who's worked with Coach Bryant for many, many years, and also was the first one named to stay on under the regime of Ray Perkins.
And that was Ken Donahue.
Right.
And he was a defensive coach, and this morning we talked to him a little bit earlier, so we can go see what he had to say.
I'm going to remember a lot of things about him. Dedication to a lot of young men, probably more than anything else. And going to remember that burning desire to win, even right on down to his last ball game.
A lot of people were talking about his last day. When they were talking about his health, the early reports were that he was fine. Were you surprised when the news came?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Just the day before, of course, he was in the office, running up and down the hall, same as always, feeling good. And we all knew that he'd had some health problems for the last 2 or 3 years, but didn't realize it was serious.
That intimacy that he had with his players and coaches, it had to be something special. You'd ask him what he said to a team at halftime, and he'd say, well, I'm sorry, I just can't tell you that. That had to be a big part of his makeup.
Yes, sir, it was. He felt like a lot of things between he and the players was personal, and didn't feel like his public is actually what he said to the players before the game or at halftime.
If Ken Donahue could have Bear Bryant remembered in such a way by the people of Alabama? Could you phrase it for us?
Well, I really couldn't. I ain't got the vocabulary to really do that. Really, a great coach, one of the greatest coaches of all times, and there'll never be another coach like him, I don't think. Nobody can fill his shoes. He'll be remembered in football as long as they have football, probably.
Another rather interesting note about the coach, the fact that he appeared in several commercials promoting eye donations over the last few years, and he did exactly what he advocated. Within minutes after his death on Wednesday, a medical team traveled from Birmingham to Tuscaloosa to remove Bryant's eyes, and Dulcie Williams of the Alabama Lions Eye Bank says that Bryant's eyes would probably be used for research at the University of Alabama in Birmingham School of Ophthalmology. The 69-year-old Bryant wore glasses, and this is something we never saw him, rarely saw him with glasses, of course, and Williams says he's not sure exactly what shape that his sight was in.
Bill, as we mentioned earlier, one of the many well-known or famous people in attendance at today's funeral services was a longtime friend and colleague of Coach Bryant's, a controversial figure.
At that.
Coach Woody Hayes, the former head coach at Ohio State University. And, of course, Coach Bryant and Woody Hayes met not only in person and became friends, but they met on the playing field as well. In their last meeting, of course, the University of Alabama beat Ohio State quite handily. And we were talking with Coach Hayes earlier this morning in Tuscaloosa, and we'd like to hear those comments.
Feelings about Coach Bryant?
Well, as I mentioned right now, I feel a great loss as I did back on a date when I was in high school, March 31st, 1931, when the fellow came over the hill at the baseball diamond and said, "Hey, you guys, Newt Rockney's dead." Yeah, and I felt the same loss then, because Newt Rockney was the great coach of the era, no question about it. And this man is the great coach of this era. And to lose him and lose his leadership is a great loss. And I think that's why everyone is here today. They feel such a great, great loss.
What sort of impression did he leave, perhaps, on you or other coaches?
Well, I think he left an enormous impression. In the first place, he was a winner. What this nation needs, because there are too many people who don't worry about winning. Well, Bear Bryant was a winner all the way through. Everything he did was to win, and win honorably, and he certainly did that. And he set a record for everybody. I don't think anybody would break his coaching record. But he was a very meticulous man in his coaching. Everything he did was done for a purpose. When you played him, you knew his ball club would play clean ball, because that kind of a man. His team was well disciplined, the way he would have them play. And when you play a man like that, you either like him or you dislike him or you respect him. Well, in his case, you respected him. And we only played once, and he gave me a pretty bad licking, but you ended up respecting him.
What sort of board?
And the former head coach at Ohio State, Woody Hayes, one of the colleagues and friends of the late Coach Bryant. One of the thousands in attendance today at the funeral services in Tuscaloosa, and of course at the Graveside services, which will take place in just a moment at Elmwood.
Woody Hayes, I didn't realize that Coach Bryant and Woody were quite as good friends, but you know, I suppose there are very few coaches that aren't good friends with Bear.
Right.
Somewhere along the line.
Now let's go back to Elmwood. Once again, here's Brian Pete. Brian?
Joe, the members of the procession are leaving their cars. Most of them have left. They're trying to find whatever spot they can to stand on, to take a final look at Bear Bryant. The services are very soon to begin. It is very, very quiet here, very solemn, very organized, I would imagine, just as the Bear would have wanted it. Of course, we are hundreds of yards away from the site because we are not permitted inside, so it's a little difficult to tell what is going on right at this instant. But from where we are, the services will start very, very soon. Joe.
Okay, thank you, Brian. And of course, as requested by the family, no cameras are allowed or microphones allowed during the graveside services or at the funeral services.
Joe, I understand now the police have estimated the funeral procession to be some 4 miles in length. So I guess they've been stretched out for quite a piece between here and Tuscaloosa this morning, and apparently made the trip in about an hour and 10 minutes to Elmwood.
Okay. And that concludes our coverage of the funeral services of Coach Paul William Bryant, the University of Alabama, who died on Wednesday of a massive heart attack. And I think, Bill, as Ken Donahue said, his defensive coordinator said, a man that will be remembered as long as there's football.
No question.
Thank you very much.